Really happy to be here and really excited to get a chance to talk about this topic. I presented this workshop, or at least a variation of this workshop, at the MLA conference, SLA conference a few months ago, and I was excited that others wanted in on this opportunity. So I am Dr. Kwana Bright. Please feel free to call me Dr. B or Dr. Bright, whatever makes sense, even just KUK. I'll answer that most days as well. I am currently an assistant professor of library science here at East Carolina University in Greenville, North Carolina. I was an academic librarian for 12 years. I did that work and was, of course, on a lot of search committees, partly because I was the diversity factor on the search committee, and there weren't many others to be there to do that work, but also because I was very much interested in helping my organization create a strong organization by bringing in the best talent for our organization. And being part of that, I learned a lot about the process and learned a lot about recruitment and retention, particularly of BIPOC candidates. And some of that is from my own experience as being a BIPOC candidate at different organizations, but also just from engaging in conversation and now engaging in research in this topic. So what I'm bringing to you today is a fairly interactive workshop. I'm going to ask you all to engage in conversation with me around these topics, around this idea of how do we address the factors that negatively impact our ability to both recruit and retain BIPOC candidates and employees to our organization. So I do have slides, of course, because I cannot exist without slides. So I'll be sharing those, and we'll make sure we share the slides out to everyone as well. So do not worry as I'm going through things today. The way I've structured this, and actually it'll help if I share the slides first. It'll be easier. So let's just do that. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. All right, so hopefully you all see my slides and not my notes. I see nodding, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much for that. So for today, our agenda, our goals, we're going to talk about the recruitment problem. We're going to have some small group discussion about BIPOC recruitment issues and concerns. And we're going to spend a little time sharing out and talking about what those concerns are and what we're hearing. Some potential solutions are going to be shared as well. Then we're going to switch over and talk about the retention problem and then have another discussion about retention issues. And then we're going to talk about those concerns and potential solutions. And then hopefully there will be time for questions and final open discussion. But I usually encourage you all to have that level of discussion throughout the process. So if we run out of time at the end, we'll definitely get questions answered, but feel free to ask questions throughout this process. So you don't feel like you have to hold on to a question that's important towards the end. The other thing is we are going to specifically be looking at trying to identify, surface, and recognize what we call addressable issues that impact recruitment and retention of BIPOC, and then also engage in open conversation. And so I do encourage you to be open in asking questions. I know sometimes it can be difficult to try to express what you are thinking or feeling, or especially when it comes to this topic, but I hope that you will be comfortable making an attempt to have that conversation as well. Let me make sure I have my chat open as well. Okay, I'm just getting my screen set up. I have two screens so I can see you all, see my notes, see the chat, and we'll go from there. So I'm going to briefly talk about the recruitment problem, but not really. So what we know is that we have percentages indicating to us that we have not moved the needle whatsoever in library and information science for librarians who identify as minorities or minoritized from being from minoritized populations. And plus we also know, and I know this as a researcher, that those numbers are skewed. They are not a complete picture because we're not always asking everyone inside of LIS the questions in terms of who you are and why you're here. It's difficult data to collect. So, but we do know there's a problem. We definitely know that there is an issue. And so I could spout numbers at you all day and tell you the percentages, and those percentages really don't give you the full information about what we're dealing with. What we do know is that our field in general has not always been seen as open and welcoming to BIPOC candidates. And what we want to really figure out is how do we then not only get them in the field, but move past that? How do we get them into your organizations? How do we make sure that you're able to recruit people to come work with you? And why are they maybe not considering your organization? Is there a reason why that might be happening? Let's see here. All right, so in terms of what we know of as recruitment barriers, getting people to even consider applying for a position in organizations, and you'll note here I say what we think we know. A lot of this is based on anecdotal information, conversations that have been had. There really hasn't been a full-scale study done yet to talk about why people have chosen not to apply for jobs, especially why BIPOC librarians have chosen not to apply for jobs. I'm actually getting ready to engage in that study myself. I have a team together and we're going to be doing that work. But we do know from these conversations, from the literature, from the stories that have been told to us, that the job ads and job descriptions themselves can be a barrier, that where information about jobs is posted can be a barrier, that a negative reputation for an organization is a barrier. Location can be a barrier, and you'll notice an asterisk there, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And that salary can be a barrier, and then also the search committee and the search process. And so these are what we're going to talk about today. What you're going to notice today in terms of how I've structured this, for this first section, I'm going to go through some information, and then I'm going to have you do some discussion. For the second side, I'm going to actually have you discuss first, and then we're going to come out and share some information about slides too. But I wanted to ease you into it. I didn't want to be that mean person that threw you into a group 5 minutes into a workshop. So when we talk about job ads and positions and descriptions, so you have to ask yourself, how inviting is your job ad for a BIPOC candidate? And one of the things that we've talked about is whether or not your job ad is reflective of your organization's DEI goals and actions. Do you even mention that information? Is salary mentioned? And I definitely know that for some organizations, you're not allowed to post salaries. We will talk a little bit about that. That it's not always a case of, not wanting people to know the salaries. That your organization doesn't do that. Benefits and what benefits are actually posted on a job description, whether or not professional development support is mentioned or included, reasonable list of responsibilities in terms of not drowning someone in that position, and then also a description of the area and the amenities that are available in the area. How do you describe the city, the community, the space for someone who's actually reading that job description? Oh, lovely. So Alex is letting us know that Illinois now has a new law requiring salaries and benefits be posted. I actually love this because it needs to be done. It is something that is actually vital just in general for any candidate, but for someone trying to make a decision about moving, really important. Now, within this, there are red flags that pop up just based on what you include in your job ad. So we talk about the fact that oftentimes if there's only an equal opportunity statement, that is a red flag for people, because to them, it might be an indication that topics related to DEI, or even the idea of DEI, is not even being considered in the organization. That is not a concern. It's not something of importance. No salary or low salary. So if you are posting, it's a low salary. And we'll talk a little bit about low salaries and what to do if you know that you have low salaries for your region, for your area. Overly experienced only. So if you're only inviting people with multiple years experience for a position, even a position that's considered entry level, that is a red flag, and usually typically goes along with not offering professional development support or the idea of being able to improve into a position. And then the role overload, which of course goes with the reasonable list of responsibilities. If you are asking someone to take on 3 roles within one job, that's a red flag. It's a red flag for anyone. One thing you'll notice here, I'm talking a lot about red flags for positions, is sometimes not just BIPOC. This is everyone, but especially if you're talking about lists of responsibilities that may include being asked to do diversity, equity, inclusion work on top of a regular job, on top of something else as well. And then if you're, of course, too vague, just asking for people to apply for a job and really not telling them what they're going to do. One thing we definitely have learned is that vagueness is something that's viewed negatively, and that people aren't interested in applying for the position. Now, in terms of where you choose to post, we've all tend to post in the traditional ways. Even my students right now are learning about using ALA's job list to locate jobs all over the country. And that's a quick, easy way to post a job. We have started recommending that people post their jobs up elsewhere if they're really looking for BIPOC candidates. So, of course, posting with all the ethnic caucuses of ALA, posting with Spectrum in particular. And Spectrum is one of the organizations that will post on their website that they're happy to help you share your job But they specifically also encourage you to make sure you are truly recruiting BIPOC candidates for the right reason. And you don't usually see a statement like that, but what they're saying is, please do not just use us as a conduit to get people if you're not going to treat them well when they're in your organization. Also using program alumni listservs, especially those who, in this case, I said health sciences concentration degrees because that's what I was using for the previous one, but anyone who, which you can look this data up, anyone who is graduating a higher number of BIPOC librarians is a good alumni listserv to have access to, because they're more likely to be able to get your job in front of recent graduates or former graduates that if you're trying to recruit for higher level positions as well. Now, I did pull this from the American Association of Health Sciences Librarians, because I wanted you to see that people have created lists for where to recruit, and they've listed not only that, but the cost to recruitment. One of the reasons why we sometimes do not post jobs to some of the ethnic caucuses or other areas is because it can be costly. Even here where I work, the cost for posting, the amount of money given to us to post jobs elsewhere is a very small amount. And we weren't even able recently to post to all the caucuses because we didn't have the amount of money we needed to do that. But there is this idea that you may need to invest some funds to be able to get your job in front of the candidates. And those candidates are going to be within these caucuses on the listservs that are more internal, and they're probably paying more attention to these spaces and locations as well. So even a location like this, you don't have to be a health sciences librarian to be able to use their list as an option to help you identify locations you may not have used in the past for posting your jobs. Now, the other thing we have to think about is your reputation. I am on multiple groups on Facebook, and one of those groups is a bit of a hidden group that allows people who identify as BIPOC to talk about their lives in libraries. And the amount of conversation that goes on about workplaces is astounding. And what that means for you as an institution, as an organization, is that if you have a bad reputation, people will know about that. And I'm specifically talking about a bad reputation in terms of how BIPOC employees have felt and have been treated in that organization. Now, I'm not saying that the information shared is true. I don't know that. But what I am saying is that just like anything else on social media, it can be shared and it can be shared widely. If you have a bad reputation, and if you happen to know that you might have a negative reputation, it is definitely something you need to acknowledge and then have conversations about how do we work on that? What do we need to change in our organization to improve that? And so this is just my soundtrack of music, the types of conversations we hear. You know, everybody's talking. It's a small world. Yes, a very small world. Library world is very small. And if you have a bad reputation, and it's something that people feel safe sharing in that space, which on social media, oftentimes shared anonymously, so it is shared. It does mean it can impact someone else who's considering becoming employed at your organization. Now, my favorite one to talk about is location, because we talk about how important location is. And I understand that there are a lot of uncontrollable things that you can't change your location. You can't move your library to another neighborhood, another city, another state. And so a lot of times these are seen as uncontrollable factors. And I agree with that. However, what we can't do is pretend like those factors don't exist. So trying to pretend like there might be issues with getting BIPOC candidates to come to a location. And some of the things we talk about are the weather. Can't control that. Cost of living, which has been going up almost everywhere. Lack of diversity in that region. And then also safety. And safety sometimes is related to safety in terms of being a person of color in that space, being a visible minority in that space. But one of the things that I've heard people talking about, and actually Tareen talked about this in Vegas and talked about how difficult it was to get people to want to come to Vegas as a location. It just wasn't seen as a location a lot of people wanted to move to. And they talked about trying to make sure that the focus wasn't just on the gambling and the resorts, that really it was about making sure they were thinking about resources that might be of interest to candidates from minority backgrounds. And that could be a variety of things. That could be not just entertainment. It could also be things related to religion, to health. Even as I talk to people about hair care, that's a recent conversation that came up when someone said, should I apply for a job in this area when I don't know if I'm going to be able to find someone to fix my hair? Not something we normally think about when we're trying to encourage people to move to our region. And it is something, though, that a person of color may think about if hair care is important to them, of course, and having someone do your hair is something that they want to know about. So if you can in many ways, create a list of resources for people to let them know, yes, there are people here who specialize in being able to do your type of hair. It would go a long way towards encouraging that person to make that decision, to move in that direction. Now, of course, show me the money, and I love hearing that, as Alex was saying, that Illinois is now requiring this. But what they've also found in research outside LIS is that if salary information is included in the job ad, it also tends to correlate with the job ad being more inclusive language-wise in general. It just means that thought went into people understanding that everyone is important and we're inviting you to apply for this job. Oh, and Alvin's pointing out, yes, having available ethnic food stores has been, yes, absolutely. So am I going to be able to find the types of foods, the ingredients that I need that I normally cook within my home? Is it something I'm going to have to wind up having to order in and pay money for to have shipped? Absolutely. Really good point, Alvin. That's something that we may not necessarily think about, but is important for someone moving to a new region or moving to an area. All right. So back to the inclusion of job ads. So thinking about the language of the job ad and people identifying inclusion of that salary as being part of that process of being inclusive and being open about the organization. Now, what we don't know for sure, though, is whether or not salary transparency in job ads can impact diverse candidates' decisions to apply for a position. This is when the magic 8 ball comes out and we say ask again later, because this is something we're going to need to investigate specifically, the impact of being transparent about salary and whether or not that is paramount to someone's decision to take a position. Now, the probably biggest elephant in the room is the search committee and the process and issues with what we have identified as implicit bias. And so this shows up, this type of bias shows up. It's not intentional usually. It's something that is ingrained in us, usually depending on where we grew up, who raised us, how we were raised, the region we lived in, even the country we lived in many cases. And this bias tends to come out even during application review by certain things that are triggered. So if you see something that seems to indicate to you that a person may belong to a minoritized group, it can sometimes lead to the person evaluating that person's resume in a slightly different way, in a negative way in some cases. So during application review, even the applicant's name can be something that can lead someone making a decision about whether or not that person is qualified for a position because they're now placing them in a box in terms of who they may identify as. You can probably imagine that me growing up as a Kawana had this issue happen quite a bit. I was actually encouraged when I graduated from my master's program to use my middle name on my applications rather than using my first name. I was encouraged to go by K. Michelle Bright because people felt that I would have fewer opportunities for people to judge me negatively based on the fact that I had what was considered to be an ethnic sounding name. Also, degree granting institution. I actually was on a search committee once where people flat out said, we do not consider people for this position if they got their master's degree from this institution because they had a negative view of that institution. And so there's an example right there where that level of bias about the institution was now filtering down to the applicants. And any applicant who applied who had a master's degree from that institution was not being considered for a position. Now, when I was on the search committee, they did get considered because I raised the issue of that's a biased review of response to that person. Can we please look at what they have in their CV and their resume? But if someone's not there to be that voice of reason, this is happening. This is being perpetuated in that process. Also, looking at language and grammar as being the end all be all. And I admit I'm a teacher. I teach my students that grammar is important. I struggle with this myself. I want to see well-written applications, but you cannot always assume that everyone's going to have perfect language skills, perfect written skills, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't do their job. And so it's making sure you're not using that as the only reason that you don't want to give someone an opportunity to continue interviewing or consider them for the position. And then finally, my favorite or least favorite is fit. We talk about this idea of whether someone's going to fit, and fit is a valid thing to look at if you're talking about the fit of their skills for the position. So how do they align with the skill set you've listed, the responsibilities you've listed? It should not be fit as in, will they fit into this community? Will they fit into our organization? Yes, you want to provide people with information about things related to food and hair care and religion and entertainment, but you do not want to make that decision for them whether or not they're going to want to live in that community based on that information. That is up to them. So fit can be considered, but only if it's fit of position to skill set. Now, this also goes straight into the interview process. So there are often concerns with applicants' appearance and how they choose to present themselves. I've been told not to wear my hair in its natural state when I go into an interview. Been told to straighten my hair. That is not something that should happen. We definitely know the Crown Act is now in place started in California, and other places are talking about that as well, where someone cannot be either denied a job or told to change their hair for a position. And then also things like the language and accent. So if someone has an accent or someone is English is not their first language, making sure that we are not using that as a reason to assume they can't do their job, that they can't be, because they can be understood. Sometimes we just assume we can't. Oh, actually, we did a question. Do you have any sample inclusive job ad language you can share with us? Actually, I'd be happy to send you what I do have. I don't have it, something I can post right here, but I do have a document that has sample inclusive job language. So I will pull that up, and when I send the slides, I'll send that as well. That's a really great question. And Alex is asking, how do you include cultural highlights in a succinct job ad? It can be difficult. I definitely say that we have to look at the amount of information that's usually included about the city, the location, the area. That's usually where you want to try to include that. What people have been doing is including a link to a resource instead of including that information. So linking to a live guide and saying, if you're interested in this information, go here, versus trying to include that in the job ad. So yeah, even like a pamphlet, you can do an online version of a pamphlet. And yeah, what if there isn't a hair care option or ethnic food option? Then it's being honest about that. You have to absolutely just be honest about that and let them make a decision at that point. And to be honest with you, what you may find out is there are food options and hair options. You just may not actually know about them. Some of them are what I call backdoor options. I have to ask the right people when I moved to Greenville where to get my hair done. I couldn't quite ask the others who didn't know. So there's sometimes just a matter of making sure that there's someone that they can ask and they can get that information. Yeah, and actually, I'll be honest with you, what we're finding just from conversations with people is that even just acknowledging that is enough to allow them to know you've thought about it and that you're not trying to hide that you're not trying to pretend like it's not a problem. And that's important. Being open in that way is very important. All right. So back to the question preparation fairness. The other thing is making sure that all questions are the same across the interview process. And yes, that does mean that you can't ask some candidates certain questions to try to find out information about them related to things like religion and their personal lives that may impact their availability for certain hours or certain things like that, or only asking questions of a candidate based on their experience and knowing that a certain candidate has that experience and can answer that question, and all the other candidates can't answer that question because they don't have that experience. You don't want to tailor questions to benefit one particular employee, or sorry, not employee, but applicant. You want to make sure all questions are asked of all applicants, but that they're all fair for all applicants. So, and we can talk more about that if we have a little time. Travel support as well. So especially for those in academic libraries where usually there's this idea that the person is going to physically come, and before the pandemic that happened a lot, and we're getting back to that now. Assuming that they have the funds to travel is a really big deal. I have met more than probably 10 people who've turned down a job interview because they were expected to pay up front to get to the job interview, excuse me, and they didn't have the funds to do that. They didn't have the over $1,000 available to buy a ticket, to get a hotel, those types of things. So being aware of that, and now that we know that we have Zoom and access to things like that, using that to our advantage. And then, sorry, once again, the fit conversation, just being aware that if you're having a conversation about fit, that you're focused on skill sets and not focused on the person in terms of their identity. All right, so the last thing before I send you in the breakout groups, and these are things I want you to be thinking about, is we do have to focus on the issue of tokenism in recruitment and hiring. So tokenism is this practice of doing something, usually hiring a person because they belong to a minority group, only to prevent criticism and to give the appearance that people are being treated fairly. So you're not really worried about them doing a job, you're just worried about the optics, you're worried about what people physically see. And how does this usually show up, and how can you tell if this is happening? Well, if you have a lot of diverse hiring pools, but you don't have any diverse hires coming out of that pool, you're hitting one of the benchmarks that a lot of institutions have, is that, hey, our pool is very diverse, they're just not coming to the top. there's usually something else going on that's causing that. If you have diverse hiring pools, but few diverse hires for extended periods, so you're only seeing someone being hired every other year, every couple of years, and usually it's because that first person hired has left and you need to hire someone else. And then also, if you're seeing diverse hires, but they're not being hired in the high level positions, if they're only being hired into staffing positions, you're not seeing that in your upper level librarian, upper level administrative positions, you want to take a look at that and see what's going on there as well. All right, so I've given you food for thought because this is where you get to talk to each other. So we're going to throw you into groups. I know that sounds really bad. I'm going to throw you into a group. I'm going to put you into small groups. Excuse me. And what I want you to do in your small groups is to try to identify the top 3 to 4, and I can be nice here, 1 to 2 as well. 1 to 2 reasons that you feel your organization struggles to recruit BIPOC candidates. And it can be from the list that we had, or this could be something else that you think is relevant and needs to be shared, like a reason why we are struggling with this ability to recruit. So in your group, if you can, try to identify at least one person who's willing to take notes so that we can do some sharing out. Doesn't have to be fancy notes, just, something jotted down so we can share out as well. And we're only going to do this over 15 minutes. This is going to be quick and fast. And so we're going to get you into your groups. You're just going to have this conversation, take some notes. I do ask that you try to keep an eye out for things that you already see overlapping between your group members. So what overlaps? And then if someone has something unique, kind of star that for us so we can share that later on. So, and then also make sure I honor what Lindsay said here. Having a long wait to reimburse travel funds can be a problem. Yes, absolutely. I'm actually in a situation like that now. Luckily, I'm not worried, but it's been 4 months and I have yet to be reimbursed for my travel. And if I weren't in the positive situation I'm in now, that would be a struggle for me, making that decision about, paying rent, pay this. I don't have the money coming in from that trip. So really good point, Lindsay. All right, so we're going to send you in for 15 minutes, and I'm going to be keeping track of this. We got plenty of time, though. I'm going to stop share, though, so we can actually make sure we're seeing that. And we'll wait till everyone pops back in. I actually went ahead and stayed in a room so that Lisa would have someone to talk to. And so we had the group conversation to have. So
yes, I'm sorry about that. It was like every time I tried to move someone, then it would just add someone back in.
It's not a problem at all. It was actually a really good conversation, so I appreciated it.
All right. We got about 5 seconds so welcome back, everyone. And
Yep.
I'm muting.
There we go. Yep. That last group from the last room that got kicked out, probably right in the middle of a thought, right? So you were probably saying something really important and then we threw you out of your room. Always happens. So thank you all so much for hopefully engaging in really good conversations. I actually wound up in a room myself and had a really good conversation. What I'm looking for now and we're not going to make every group speak up and we may have some overlapping things, but if I can get a couple of groups to volunteer, maybe what some of the overarching parts of the conversation, and also if anyone identified a unique thing that we didn't talk about in the previous part of my lecture that you want to share with the group. So any volunteers, you can throw a hand up and or maybe, Lucas, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one of the participants in my group, they were talking about how most of the positions that they hire for are part-time, which I think is built into what you mentioned before. So just the idea that it's not a sustainable potential career position. But then they said when they are hiring for those full-time positions, they most frequently are promoting from within of people who have been there and put in the time. And so it's just like a cycle where it's hard to get anyone that is a potential diverse candidate in the library, in that system.
Exactly. It's hard to break that cycle too once it's been put in place. And I know a lot of libraries are dealing with that as well. And of course that means the next goal is can you get a diverse applicant into one of those other positions so that they're then eligible for the, moving up into a later position as well. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. That's going to be a purposeful intent needs to go behind positions in that location and pushing back probably against a higher group about what positions can be had. I definitely know that once you lose a position or once you try to change a position, there can be a lot of negativity there. So, but that's a really good point to share that sometimes it's the very hiring culture of the type of position that's causing the biggest barricade. So not an easy thing to get over, but I'm not going to say insurmountable. I'm going to say that it's going to involve more than just the library to fix. It usually takes the library, HR, and another group to come in and say it's okay to make this change, but it might need to be a purposeful plan goes into place to actually make that change. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic. I got two hands. I'm going to go with Suzanne first because they're on the left, and then Alvin, you'll go after Suzanne.
Hello. So I was talking with Kathleen and Ashley, and in addition to the full-time and part-time issue that has been mentioned, we talked about that our job postings on Rails is so successful that we don't take the effort to spend money on other job posting websites because libraries are known to be penny pinchers. So that was one thing. And then the other thing we talked about is some of our libraries are just in locations that do not have that public transportation. That is an option that distracts obviously a lot of candidates regardless of their background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be surprised. I grew up in the South. You had to have a car, right? We didn't have public transportation if you didn't have a car. And I've moved now to enough places where people don't have vehicles. They take public transportation. So if you ask someone who's been living in a city somewhere where they've relied on public transportation to then up and move to a location where they also have to now afford a vehicle, or be able to afford to live close enough to the library, which often means you can't, because usually that's the prime real estate for housing. So yeah, that's one of the things that you start looking at, the possibility of creating carpools and things like that internally. So can we find a way to make it easier? I live in this community and there's affordable housing in this community. And I also work at the same place. Would you like to carpool with me and maybe do that type of sharing until that person maybe gets themselves to a point where they can't afford to afford a vehicle. And if you're also like where I live, bike lanes don't exist. So or at least not safe bike lanes. So that would be like the usual alternatives. That you get a bike, right? I can afford a bike, but no, it's not a safe place to bike. So yeah, but thinking about creating maybe an internal employee carpool where people talk about that, or even not necessarily, someone within your location, but even just the surrounding community, start having more of this. We all work in this downtown region or this location. Can we have a type of carpooling service that allows us to work together to support that? So might have to be one of those collaborative efforts that moves beyond that. So really great point, though. Really great point. I think we had Alvin. Alvin, where'd you go?
Yeah.
Oh, there you
are. We actually also talked about public transportation and transportation in general. In part, I work at the city of Chicago, and we do have some big transportation deserts within the city. So if somebody were to have to go to one of those branches, it might be difficult for them to do so. But for my library, it's also kind of the process, which you talked about a little bit too. But it's the interview process for us takes so long because of all the laws that we have to abide by and such. All of the hierarchy and structures that we have in place.
Yeah, the red tape. And I've learned that it's not even just, I used to think it was just academic libraries that struggled with the length of time it took to hire. And I'm hearing now that it's not just academic libraries, that public libraries struggle with this as well. And one thing that we've had to do, of course, is work within HR's rules about how quickly can we start doing things, but we've started streamlining things as well. We've been doing our best to push that conversation to what can we cut, what can we push, what can we move, just to force them to acknowledge that their processing time does not assist us in being able to hire successfully. One thing we learned here at ECU is that they weren't aware of those concerns. They just had a processing time at major HR, and they just kept doing what they always did. And we kept telling them that if we can't get this job offer out by this point in time, we can't hire this person to start work in the fall. We need to be able to post this job in 2 days. And really, we had to make that clear. And they actually were able to work with us, but that was a miracle. I'm not saying that's ever going to happen to everyone, but it's sometimes just needing to let them know that this is our timeline. Can you please work with us? And getting them to at least start having that conversation about what can we change? What can we move as an institution to support the work you're trying to do instead of being something that's hampering the work that you're trying to do. So really great point there as well. Suzanne, and I cut you off. Did you have something else to add before? I just moved right over to Alvin. I didn't even ask you had anything else to add. You're good? Okay, perfect. Might have time for one more. Anyone else want to share anything that was different or just something that resonated with you before we move on? Want to make sure I give you time to speak. Oh, no problem, Lisa. Thank you so much. All right, we're just going to go ahead and move on then because we're going to basically move right into talking about retention now. And as I mentioned, a little bit different from the previous conversation where I gave you a lot of information. This time I'm going to actually have you go into breakouts right after I give you very brief information. So let me go back to sharing my screen here. See if I can get back to my PowerPoint today. Yep, that was our breakout groups. Let's move over here. All right, so this is a reminder that, of course, your experiences, depending on who you are, may not be like the experience of the BIPOC employees you have. And I even say this as someone who is classified as BIPOC, that other people's experiences are not like my own. Oftentimes it's this apples to oranges type of comparison. And so it's important that we start thinking about why their experiences may be different and acknowledging that what we may have happening in our field, especially, is a retention problem that's more of a revolving door. So what we may be seeing a lot of is you're able to recruit one, but you're unable to keep that one, they leave. You're able to get one more, they don't stay, they leave. That's not conducive to you, one, being able to recruit more, but also just not conducive. I mean, the amount of time and effort that goes into training and supporting someone, then to have to start all over again. It's just very difficult. And as many of you mentioned, you're having trouble recruiting anyway. So if you get one in, you want to keep that person and make sure they're actually able to be successful and support your institution. And so when we talk about retention factors, this is once again what we think we know and what the literature tells us and what experience tells us is that mentoring is important. That having a mentor, having someone that they can rely on to support them in that process is important. Professional development support is coming through is important. And we're actually starting to see this both quantitatively and qualitatively. Research shows that people will indicate that if they have professional development support, they're more likely to remain at an institution. Promotion and advancement in terms of whether or not they've had access to promotion, the ability to advance, or whether or not there have been concerns about their access and seeing others promoted over them for reasons that may not necessarily be clear. And we're not always saying it's biased, but sometimes there are concerns with that implicit bias as well. The community and sense of belonging, the conversation I was having in my small group was a concern with people not feeling like they belong to the broader community, not the library, but the broader institution, and how that was problematic as well for keeping someone there. Do they feel safe, and do they have people they can trust at the organization? And then I'm going to mention poaching here, and most of you probably aren't going to come up with that as one of your reasons for retention, but I'll talk to you about poaching at the end of this session. So just wanted to introduce these ideas because what we're going to do now is right back into our groups so that you can have a conversation just amongst yourselves. It doesn't have to be about this. It doesn't have to be specific to these, but why do you feel, if you've been able to hire BIPOC employees, but they haven't stayed, what are some of the reasons why the loss of those employees? What are some of the reasons why you feel you can't retain them? So same process, going to drop you back into a group. I think we can do 15 minutes and still have time for talking. So let's aim for me. Still talking? Yep. I was cut off and it was just, I see how rude that is. I'm so sorry. All right. So hopefully some good conversations. For this round, same thing. Anyone have something they want to pinpoint as either the key thing that they were discussing and saying, hey, this is the key reason that we're struggling with retention in our organization, or something that just maybe was surprising that you identified. So everyone's like, go ahead, Courtney. Yeah, sure.
So I have a feeling maybe everyone else had the same reason, but low pay in libraries is obviously a really pertinent issue. So even with benefits, because we did create a lot of full-time positions with benefits, hoping that would help with retention. But we have been, in my organization in Wheaton, Illinois, we've been finding we're still having a lot of turnover and difficulty hiring just in general, much less diverse candidates. And then being in Wheaton, Illinois, we are kind of known for being a white conservative community. We are I feel like we are getting more and more diverse all the time, but we still have a long ways to go. But so the low pay, and then just leaving, if it is a part-time position, leaving the organization for a full-time position, or going to library school, or just other opportunities, but also just a lack of diversity in the organization or the community. I had a former manager years ago leave for a more diverse community and library, and she was a person of color, and said, you know, Wheaton is not diverse enough, and she went to more diverse libraries. So totally understandable. That's why it is difficult to retain staff of color. So, and then also location can be difficult. A person in my group is located in central Illinois. So that's a challenge in of itself. And then we had Dan from Rails, who said, people don't even know what Rails is. They're located in a warehouse in Burr Ridge with no public transportation. So that is also a challenge as well.
A big challenge, a big challenge. And I think what we're definitely hearing is that recruitment is a little bit easier to address some of the issues. They're a little bit more like, we can do this, we can do that, we can probably make ourselves a little bit more appealing, but retention can be more difficult, because then once someone's in that space, there are certain things you cannot change about your city, about your community. And really it is about making sure that if you are able to hire a BIPOC candidate, a diverse candidate, that they are specifically coming in with the knowledge about that community, and the knowledge that, you know, I'm not going to be surprised by this. I'm ready. You know, I'm going to get there, and I know that things are going to happen, but I'm ready to work in that community. But we all understand that after a while, that can weigh on anyone. That level of, in my group, we talked about having one staff member who was Black. That was it. And the isolation that goes along with that, and that feeling of even if your peers support you and like you and you talk, you still feel isolated. You still feel different, because it's noticeable that you are the only one within that group. So one thing we definitely talk about is if you're able to do cluster hires. One thing we've talked about is this idea of being able to try to bring in more than one person, and that goes for everyone. Just bringing in a kind of a cohort group, and if you're able to get multiple diverse people who come in at the same time, they create their own cohort. They create their own little bit of community, and they're no longer feeling alone. Now, the problem with that, of course, is you may not have the funds to do cluster hires. Even for part-time positions, you may not be able to hire more than one person at a time. But if you can look at your staffing, if you can look at your organization and start moving in that direction a little bit, where you're bringing in multiple people to work, and if you're able to attract diverse people and get one or two at the same time, that might help a little bit with that, at least that sense of isolation, that feeling of being alone, and helping them create that kind of cohort group. For those who might be in academic libraries, you're looking at the idea of the residency program as an option of creating those types of programs where you bring in applicants specifically to support them, with the knowledge that they may not stay after 2 years, but that's okay, because your goal is to support them in the field. But that might wind up being the same thing you do in a public library, is that you bring in people with this idea that you're going to support them and help them grow for a couple of years, and they may leave you, but if they feel supported in that process, they may also stay. They may also stick around for a while and be okay. We've had the conversation as well. We've got to find a way to get rid of all these part-time positions. Not all, but we've got to find a way to get you all into full-time positions. And actually, a member of my group, Mary, was telling me that Illinois just passed a law saying there's going to be benefits for part-time, some benefits for part-time. So I was excited to hear that. So that might actually help a little bit, where you might be less likely to lose as many people, because they have some benefits to help support them in those positions, while you're all maybe working on finding a way to turn those into full-time positions and keep them around for a while. So the hard part about this conversation is that we're starting to hit things that are bigger than us, that are so much bigger than us, and harder for us to do individually, and really do require, in some cases, changes in law, changes in how we do things in our communities. And that may wind up needing to be a whole combined group of people coming together to make those changes. So it makes it a little harder. Thank you so much, Courtney, for sharing that and sharing for your group. Alex, is that your hand I see up?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So we also, noticed that our biggest retention issue was part-timers leaving for full-time jobs, which is wonderful. We all want that to happen. And as we work towards that, we recognize, libraries are not very upwardly mobile. There's one department head that you can get. And if you want to be a department head, we don't do murders in the building or whatever that show is. But you have to wait for them to leave. And then there's still only that one position. So who's going to get it? And so we talked about what can we do to make our part-timers jobs better while they're here, and maybe they're going to leave, but they're going to leave better prepared, which is good, especially if they're BIPOC people. They're moving on to a bigger opportunity, but also to maybe make them stay a month, 2 or 3 longer. If you're giving them the opportunity to write a grant, they want to see that through. So they're not going to start their job search until that's done. Or if they had just started a program that they had an idea for a story time or something, then they're going to stay a little bit longer and you get the benefit from them. We did have a discussion. There was somebody who, and thankfully the person in their exit interview was honest and was like, and there were some DEI issues that they left. And the one that they talked about was like on day one, when they got their email address, this person had a long last name, and the IT person, their naming convention was first initial last name. That's common, but they truncated the name after 4 initials. And so like from day one, they took away,
part of their
name.
identity.
Yeah. And they did it because it's to make it easier for people to remember and to write the name and all that. And I'm sure that was the intent, but that type of you need to be conscious of that. And if there is, because I know ours, I think only goes certain number of letters anyway. If you do have to cut that off or do anything along those lines, you need to have that conversation and explain it early on. It's like, hey, I understand that, we couldn't get your whole name in here. And so this is why, and maybe be open to going, is there a way that we can rearrange it that makes you more comfortable or makes it better for you? But those types of, microaggressions or whatever you want to call them, I don't know if that might be too big for a microaggression, but
it's a technology microaggression. It's relying on the technology and trusting technology more than trusting a person. So instead of asking a person, you just let the technology do it, and then you just wipe your hands clean and say, "But that's what the rule is." No, it's not. That you can fix that. It's a type of microaggression. Absolutely. Yeah.
So those were the main things. We all have the retention, but it's largely part-time going on to full-time elsewhere, and that's not much we can address.
Can do about that. Yeah. Oh, and actually you pinpointed something my group was talking about, and something I think is really important to mention here. And I have a slide for this, so I'm going to do a quick share so I can make sure. I'm going to share these slides out because I'm not going to go through all these today, but and you do not need to see. Oh yeah, I can see these notes. So this idea of professional development support. So what Alex was talking about, this idea that you can give people opportunities to gain skills, to develop themselves in that position, even a part-time position where oftentimes they don't have as many opportunities to engage in that type of fresh professional development. But if you can give them opportunities to gain new skills and new skill sets, what research is telling us, including research that I've been working on lately, tells us that this is connected to overall job satisfaction. It's connected to people being happy. And if people are satisfied in their jobs, they don't leave. They will actually take less money, unfortunately. They will take less, certain things will go away because they love their jobs and they know they're not going to be able to find that job in another location, even if that other location is in a place that is more diverse, or even if that the location gives them slightly more money. There is a point where people will tell you that more money is not good enough for me to be treated horribly in a position. I've been in a position where I was paid plenty of money. I was treated horribly. I chose to get a position that paid me less money in a place where I was treated better. And so people will make those decisions. So if you create an environment for them where they feel supported, able to learn and grow, even if it's in small increments, even if I love the example you said, Alex, where they get to start a program and they're going to see that program through. They want to follow through that program. That's important. That's something concrete that they get to hold on to. And if they only stay a few more months, that's still beneficial for the library. It's still beneficial for them. So I really love that point that you included about the example of giving them those opportunities. So pay attention to professional development, pay attention to also if they, one position, opportunities to move up, but making sure that process is also fair. So if people are able to move up into that position, make sure that it is a fair process, that people aren't being selected to move in those positions just because of longevity or for reasons that maybe don't necessarily mean that that's why they need to be there, that everyone has the same information about promotion, that people aren't being told behind closed doors how to get to a place and other people are not being allowed to invest in that. We talk a little bit about this idea of unconscious bias in that process. And so we tend to fall prey to this in libraries, affinity bias. We respond very positively to those who are very similar to us, that people who remind us of how we were, maybe went to the same school, maybe came from the same community, same neighborhood, those types of things, same background, which means that we're more likely to hire them, promote them, train them, mentor them, and value them for those reasons alone. Even if there are other people who might also be great at the job and just need that same support, what happens is we tend to support them because of things that are based on their identities rather than the important things, their skill sets, their ability to do the job. And if we start only hiring, promoting, training, mentoring, valuing because of they're like us, then we lose out on innovation and problem solving and all those lovely gifts. That's what Perez tells us about people being able to work together. So it's important that we are paying attention to that as we are offering people opportunities and acknowledging the limitations of our positions and not acknowledging the limitations of our organizations. And then also keeping an eye on what they call confirmation bias, making sure that we aren't only looking for evidence that supports our beliefs and sometimes ignoring evidence that is contradictory, which happens a lot when we see people behaving in certain ways in the organization, especially people who are identified as BIPOC. So any of their types of behavior is usually seen as stereotypical, and stereotypical behaviors are seen as negative in the workplace. And then that becomes the image that we have of someone, which affects their ability to be successful as well. So I think I had a chat come in as well. Let me make sure I got that. Oh yeah, and that preference for internal versus external. And I will be honest with you, I've seen that go both ways. I've seen internal hires that have been really good at the position because they know the organization, but I've also seen internal hires who are so drenched in the organization, they can't come up with anything new. There's no innovation, there's nothing new. I've seen external people come in and do wonderful things to help build an organization up. I've seen external people come in and drag an organization down because they didn't understand the culture and didn't understand the organization. So, but there's definitely a lot usually in our field, this preference for internal versus external. And I don't know about you all, but I've been in situations where jobs were posted only because they had to be posted. And then you had great external candidates apply, and then you couldn't hire them because the job had been given to an internal person. That's a no-no. But we do it all the time in libraries. I've seen it happen so many times because of this idea that we should keep the internal person. They should get that job. They should move up. They're not the best person for the job, though. They shouldn't get the job. So, and typically if there's an external person who would be a better person for the position, then you want them in your organization. And what we're seeing, of course, is that this is happening a lot to where it's not the BIPOC person who's being elevated. They're not internal, they're usually external. And if they're not being fully considered, there's a lot of discouragement for applying for jobs, getting to that final level and never being offered a position and knowing that it's because there's an internal person. So that happens quite a bit. All right, we are down to 4 minutes. I just realized this, we're almost out of time. So I wanted to make sure I honored you all and said, are there any additional questions or thoughts that came out of those conversations? Again, I'm going to share all my slides, and I do encourage you all to please know you can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to offer support. I actually love reading job descriptions. So if anyone would like me to read a job description to offer some insight on language, things like that, I will do that in a very happy way. And then if there's just anything I can offer a little advice on, and I know I've got a resource that I'm going to put together to send out to you all for inclusive language in job descriptions. I'll make sure I find that. May take me a couple of days. I got a new computer. We're not going to ask about my organizational skills. I know I'm a librarian. Don't tell on me. I mean, I'm trying. I will find the document, but I'll make sure I share that. But if there's anything else I can share, please let me know. I'm more than happy to do that with you all.
And while you may be thinking up of a question or a comment, I do want to let you know that I will have the video or the recording link up by Monday at the latest. I will put that up even if I don't have all of Dr. Bright's slides and everything yet, and then I'll just add that as we go. Just so if you want to share that with other Rails members, that is absolutely fine.
And you will definitely have it by Monday, I promise, because I'm going to be getting on an airplane, so no excuses. All right. No other questions, thoughts? I don't see any crying. This is good. No crying is always good.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
if we don't have anything else, I would just really love to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Bright for enlightening us today. And thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate your support and your interest in the Rails CE programs. So thank you so, so much.
Oh, thank
Ever
you
have
all.
any questions, please just email ce@railslibraries.org.